So this tier list is going to be focused towards every single artifact that's in the game. My plan is to be done within 2 hours, which means I need to do these in about an hour or like a minute and a half per artifact, maybe 2 minutes if I'm being slower to get through this, because there's currently 55 artifacts in the game, which is a good amount. So I'm going to be going kind of fast. If you guys have stuff to say, try to put it in a little bit sooner, because if I'm trying to not slow down too much. I think the most I'll spend is like 3 minutes if something's like really, really interesting, but most of these will be a little bit quicker, and there's going to be a few that are a little bit better. Most are C and D, so it should be easy for the most part, yeah. So starting off here, we have Azoth Conductors. Azoth Conductors are a new artifact that's being added that was originally delayed, actually not going to be delayed now, where if you're in a medium equip load, you deal 15% more elemental damage. The main thing here is like what elemental classes want to go into a medium equip load. The nice part here is if you go into medium, you effectively are just not going to you're not going to lose damage, and you're just going to gain a lot more tankiness. I think it's possible that this will see some use from like fire staff players if you're going for like a flamethrower build. Like it's possible to use this, especially because it has refreshing and health, which are really good perks for a fire staff build. So I feel like this is a decent artifact. I don't think it will be used a ton right away, but it seems like fine. Like it seems like a B tier artifact to me. Like not broken, kind of fine. I think this is the new Nature's Wrath. I mean, potentially, but I feel like people like light too much. Like people like the movement from light. But it seems like it could be really strong. Like if people ever got to the point where they're like, you know, I don't need this movement from light and I'd rather be a little bit tankier, like this is a very solid artifact to go for medium players. Okay. I got rid of my thing because I wasn't thinking. So next up here, we got Attuned Leather Pants. Attuned Leather Pants is a unique artifact because it gives you access to more stat points. So usually you don't have this 10 to everything, and your Magnify... Oh, what is it like if I get it to the upgrade recipe? I'm trying to look at the better one, but it seems like the upgrade recipe isn't quite working here in terms of how many stats it gives. But the point is it gives extra stats, so it turns to... It was better when there were less stat points available. Now that the stat point thresholds just keep increasing, this artifact starts to lose more and more value, but it's still really good for builds like Musket in particular. Like it's been used a lot for Musket in the past, because the base damage that you normally gain with artifacts was not as powerful as it was to just gain extra stat points. I think this artifact's going to be fine, but I don't think it's going to be like quite as good as Azoth Conductors. Like I think it'll be a little bit worse this time around, just because I feel like with the amount of stat points that we're just continually getting, it doesn't really make sense to try to push for more and more stat points. It makes more sense to try to push for a little bit more damage from your artifacts itself, because the amount of stat points is increasing. Less than 1% will use. Yeah, not a lot of people use Attuned Leather Pants, but it's a nice one to get. Go open beta, you're on live. Oh, thank you. That would explain why I don't see it there. Let's see, how many stats is it then? Are you gonna show me? Show me the stats, please. If I click you, can I have the option to drag it? Nope. 725? Like the 725 links to the 700 page, so I still can't see the amount of stats that you get. But the only thing that would change is the magnify part here. The well-rounded would remain the same. Attuned Pants you get from story, though. Availability is strong, I mean. Yeah, like this is a really good artifact to use like when you're first getting like leveled up. So like when you're going from 0 to max, this might be the first artifact that you actually get in a game. If you do the Elysian Wild quest line, you just get this at the end. So this is like a very solid artifact for early game, but like mid-late game it kind of falls off a bit. Keeping along here, Wing Leather Shoes is an artifact that I think will be particularly good for like fire staff. I think this is the new variant of the chest piece that everyone ran all of last patch, because haste is effectively permanent now due to a new perk that they added to armor. Like if I go to Gorgon and then I find an armor piece here, so if I go to like Tusks or something like that, then we go to perk buckets, they added, what's it called? Okay, it's not down that far. I know it's on legs at least. I think it's Hasted Vigor. Yeah, Hasted Vigor. So potency of incoming damage over times effects is reduced by 7% per armor piece. That doesn't really matter. And when taking a hit while inflicted with a dot, you'll gain 10% haste for 5 seconds. So effectively, this is like permanent haste in PvP situations. PvE, it's not permanent, but it's like likely that you're going to have a very high haste up time. If you have haste up, the duration gets extended with this. And then also you just deal more base damage while you have a haste effect on you. So this seems like very, very solid to me. It seems like this is going to be pretty consistent. Crush, could you, or I can ban the random dude who's advertising stuff. But I think this artifact will probably fall into like S tier, or not S tier, but like A tier. User that you're trying to ban doesn't exist. Great. Happens to have a longer name too, which is annoying. There we go. All right. So that's wing leather shoes. I think these will be used in PvP Island and OPR a lot. Yeah, I mean, OPR, they're consistent, right? Because you have access to the haste food that just gives you haste all the time, so you're just always doing more base damage. Like, it's going to be really, really good. Like, this is definitely A tier, maybe S tier. Ankh is formerly the best artifact in the game. I think in the spot where we're at now, Center of Attention, which nerfs your pots, basically, like your individual health pots, but makes it so that incoming heals are a bit better, will make it so that this is more exclusively good for medium to large scale and not really viable for small scale. So I think this effectively makes Ankh a little bit less like of a thing that you need to have. But that being said, it's still one of the best artifacts in the game. It's still A tier. The only problem with Ankh is it's basically completely RNG to get. If you notice here from the drop range, between like level 0 and level 100 the PvP track, you have only like what 29, 30, 59, 69, 79, 89. Like those levels have a chance to drop this artifact, and it's like very far from guaranteed. Like it's only a few % chance to get it, which effectively means that you're very unlikely to get this artifact until the very, very like late game. So much so that like it almost seems like something that new players shouldn't even try to get anymore, because it's just not going to be consistent to acquire. Wing Shoes probably are go-to for a light DPS in PvE. Fuck Ankh, only the 4th tune and doesn't even exist anymore. Yeah, you basically can't get Ankh anymore. That used to be a lot easier to acquire. Then people complained that it was too hard to acquire artifacts in the late game, but it was relatively easy to acquire these artifacts in the early game. So AGS proceeded to make these artifacts basically impossible to get in the early game and not make them easier to get in the late game. And people got upset. And that's kind of where we sit with Ankh. So Blooddrinker is... We talked about this one a little bit earlier before the stream stuff started kicking off. So what this does is it reduces your base damage, but it makes it so that you have an increase in the amount of lifesteal. All healing from lifesteal is also increased by 5%. So this is like a good PvE, like I'm a solo player artifact. But other than that, it's really not viable. And the reason why I say that is that the lifesteal can only work off of single targets. It's not like off of AoEs, which makes it a lot less OP. What is Bis in PvE? Soul Trials, Strat Bis. Yeah, like for Soul Trials, this is a really, really good artifact. For solo PvE, honestly, even the island, it's like, it's not a bad artifact to have. But like, so I guess that is actually kind of a significant amount of the game mode now, because a lot of stuff is solo. Like normally I would put this artifact on like C to D tier, but because a lot of the content now is more focused towards solos, I can probably aggressively put that in B for now. Boltcaster is the best bow artifact in the game. So, and I don't think there's much else to be said about this. It just turns all your shots into a lightning damage. You gain extra damage if you hit someone that has 3 or more stacks that apply every time you hit them. And this is like what makes bow feel really, really strong nowadays. And I don't expect that to go away. Boltcaster just is super, super good. And I think this is still an S tier artifact because it makes bow why bow is like really, really good in the hands of good people. Like if bow was like normally down here with Boltcaster and a good port person, and it can get like a ton more value. So it's just very, very solid. The 25% leech from Blooddrinker isn't AoE? No, it's not. The Blooddrinker leech did not used to have a cooldown, but now it does. So if you go to New World Buddy, you can see that too. So if I go to Blooddrinker, and then we go to Ghoul's Harmony, and then you go to the status effect, I think. And it has the tick rate. I'm pretty sure the tick rate is related to the maximum it could hit. Let's see. Let's go here. I think this is related to the cooldown. But let me look at Leech too as like a reference. It's been a bit since I've like gone through all this stuff with like New World Buddy. Like is there a different thing here? Oh no, no, you're right. Activation cooldown's present for Leech, but I don't see it for Blooddrinker. I don't see activation cooldown on here. I thought it used to have an activation cooldown though. Huh. Well, if this works off of AoE, then it makes Blooddrinker a decent amount better, to be honest. That's something I kind of want to test now. So you're telling me I should run Blood in my solo OPR grind for Ankh? I mean, it's a fine artifact to have. You either go Blooddrinker or you go for the Earring artifact. Both are very good. So yeah, I might bump. I don't know if I want to bump it up to A tier. I'll put it like high B tier. I still think it's better than Azoth Conductors though. Like I'd probably stick it still in B, but it's still that makes it a lot better if the Leech actually works as an AoE. Which the reason why I think it works as an AoE now is activation cooldown is present for Leech, but I don't see activation cooldown present in Blooddrinker at all, which I thought it had that at one point, but maybe they reverted it. Okay. Next up, we have the Butcher. Butcher's a very solid artifact. Like I think it's like a B tier artifact for most players. For tanks, this is like the artifact that you go for. But I don't think it's an artifact that like completely transforms like how the class plays. It's just very, very good. Like this is a high B, low A tier artifact. Like I don't think it's at the same tier as Wing Leather Shoes or Ankh, but it is like along with Azoth Conductors and Blooddrinker. I think it's a little bit better than both these, just because the bleed effect makes it so that you get ult charged really fast, since every single tick from a bleed will make it so that you can get like more ult charge off of each individual tick, and you can just apply a lot of bleeds with the Butcher, which effectively just makes it an ult charge battery, and that's the main reason why it's used. It also applies a rend, which is kind of nice. B tier artifact on S tier weapon. Yeah, which effectively makes it like good. Most sword and shield players don't use this artifact. This is more for tanks. Like an average sword and shield player will actually just use a default sword because they don't really want to play for the bleed effects, and they'd rather go like Scorpion Sting or something like that. But it's a fine artifact to use. Like it's solid. Okay, now we have Creed boots. I messed this up again. Creed boots were added kind of recently. I don't think that they were ever insane though. Like they haven't really been used. So ambush, deal 50% more damage and 25% crit chance as long as you haven't hit the target within 20 seconds. Yeah, that's terrible. That's D tier. And the reason why that's terrible is your first shot won't do that much damage. Your first shot, if you run like Onyx and like all these things that boost your initial hit, will maybe hit like 6 to 8k damage, and people have like 3 to 4 times that much amount of HP, and then this won't really allow you to finish targets off. So unless you're like just playing the last hit people, like I don't really see the value of this artifact at all. Ambush 3-2-1 teamers. I mean, if you're teaming, like it's okay, but there's just better artifacts for this. So this is just 15% more damage. The crit chance doesn't really matter, right? If I want 10% more damage, I could just run Wing Leather Shoes, and that's going to be up for the most part. Or I could just run Azoth Conductors, and that's always 15%. Like, why do you want a conditional 15%? To me, this artifact needs a really, really big buff. Like if they change that 20-second cooldown to a 3-second cooldown, I'd still probably say it's not that good. Like it could use that big of a buff. Cowl of Power is a newer one. I think it got added this time. Yeah, it did. So if you hit an enemy while your mana is below 50%, gain 4 seconds of 25% increased damage with a 10-second cooldown. That's not awful, but I don't think it's as good as the other artifacts. So your mana being below 50% is like a conditional. It's like kind of hard to deal with. Like your idea, if you wanted to like use this to max effectiveness, would be like get your mana down low, maybe use something like the Abyss, and then just tag somebody, and you just gain that 25% increase to damage. But there's just better ways to get that, and also you have to run this with light. Like you wouldn't really like it doesn't work for medium armor, it doesn't work for heavy armor because in medium you don't really run a light headwear. Like I guess you can, but it's not going to be optimal in terms of your armor. So it seems niche. So I'd probably put it like lower C. Honestly, I'd probably put this high D. Like I don't think it's really going to be used that much. Like it's a low C, high D tier artifact. Why do I have two things with Creed Boots? Well, just ignore the second one with Creed Boots. I'll just throw that at the bottom here. Deep Freeze. Deep Freeze is an artifact that just increases your base damage pretty consistently. The best part about Deep Freeze is you could use it as an offhand and it increases your main hand's base damage. The weird part about that is it can just be better to like not go for this artifact and just run a main hand artifact that's just better. But for the most part, Deep Freeze is just the superior option. So like for Fire Staff, for example, you can go Deep Freeze with PvP-oriented Fire Staff that has illegal perks that I'm forgetting the name of off the top of my head. And then that will result in like very, very high damage output, and then you just get a bonus because you have this chilling end passive. So it's more of a large scale artifact though. It's not as good in smaller scale. This is like a low A tier artifact. Flint Stick? Yeah, it's good with Flint Stick. S? I mean, you could argue it's S because of its like how useful it is utility wise. The only reason why I'm not going to put it in S immediately here is because I think we're talking about like mostly small to mid scale, and in small to mid scale it's not consistent to have Deep Freeze's effect proc, so I would still put it in like lower tier A. Like maybe better than Ankh in the current meta, and like worse than Wing Shoes, which is still really high on the tier list so far, but it's not that good. Djinj Headwrap is D tier. I feel like we don't really need to talk about this one that much. What it does is it reduces the potency of dot effects and reduces the potency of other effects that are applied to you, like debuffs. And while it's good for that, and it's a decent artifact to use in the early game, in the end game, Vigor's not really considered to be good, like at all. And Invigorated I think is good for certain builds, but it's not good enough to be strict for viable for a lot of things. Like as a VG flail player, this is an artifact I will consider, but for like 99% of builds, this is never an artifact that you consider. And because of that, like I think you have to put it lower. I guess because it's viable in one build, like I could put it like mid D, but like it's not very solid to troll VG players. Yeah, I mean that's like you can make it so that effects just don't have a duration on you if you stack enough of the like invigorated like effects, I think, but it's like it's hard to get to that threshold. Or no, it's with the dot effects. You can make dots not have a duration on you, which can be actually useful sometimes, but it's like it's not consistent enough to feel worth like prioritizing, if that makes sense. Vigor and Invigorated need to be combined. Yeah, they do. This artifact like kind of combines them with this unique perk, but like Vigor and Invigorated don't seem to be good enough alone to be viable. Elemental Band is S tier. Actually, it's probably higher than Boltcaster because of the bug that we talked about earlier. Elemental Band, this is probably worth reading Finch's thing again. Let's see, where's Finch's post? So, Ring Artifacts, let's talk about Elemental Band, looks bugged in beta, like completely bugged and not ready to be used. First of all, according to the description, it should not work off of dots, but abilities you have equipped using it only have one target for one requirement on hit true. They also have one more line there, or should have one more line there, or have require reaction true, but this line is missing, hence it should work on dots. So this works off dot effects, even though it says it will not work off dot effects. And then the stack max is 6. This means the max potency is 24%, and also because there's an activation cooldown that's 10, and it can basically refresh off other effects, and that will refresh the duration of this Empower. It's very easy to get this to max percent. So effectively, this is like a permanent 24% Empower that you have up all the time with its current build. If they fix some of these bugs, it will be less good, but as it stands right now, and because of like how it works with the refresh, this is effectively a free 24% Empower, which is basically as strong as an ultimate perk on a weapon. It is insanely good. The Abyss is a little bit more unique. Did you test the wall? I think that elemental damage is not working properly. A while ago, but that was a bug from a very long time ago that they supposedly fixed with the wall, and it seems like they fixed. The Abyss, like that got fixed like 6 months ago to a year. The Abyss is an artifact that allows Great Axe to go into void damage. The issue previously with this artifact was that if you had a void-based dot, like the Attunement, that Attunement damage would scale off of... Or no, it wasn't like Attunement. It was like a dot effect that came from the weapon. That dot effect that came from the weapon would scale off of Strength, not Int, which effectively made it so that the Abyss didn't do a ton of damage. This artifact's best used to get around people heavily warding to slash damage. In terms of its actual damage increase, it's not a ton. And the main thing that this artifact's good with is Fire Staff, because you need to get your mana lower, and just from how it plays out in terms of like what range you need to play with this artifact to get a ton of value, it turns out that Fire Staff just works pretty well with the Abyss. The Abyss does enable its own archetype. It is a solid artifact. It's kind of a harder one to acquire. I think this is a little bit above B tier because it does enable its own archetype, so I'd probably put it lower A, but it's not mandatory by any means. Is this a weapon tier list for New World? This is an artifact one. We did weapon ones yesterday. Today we're trying to get through all the artifacts, which is quite a lot. Endless Thirst is one of the best artifacts in the game for a variety of reasons. If I could spell endless correctly, that would be helpful. Or thirst. But the main thing with this is it just makes it so that your individual healing pots are significantly better. This combined with Survivor's Coat, which is a new artifact that resets the cooldown of your pots if you get below 50% HP, effectively makes it so that you could be borderline invincible in 1v1 situations. This artifact is basically a must-have for the island. I think it's a very good artifact for 3v3. I think it's a very strong artifact for OPR. I think it's a solid artifact for war. I think this artifact belongs in the top of S tier because it's like very, very viable for every mode. I might put it behind Elemental Band though, because I think Elemental Band's bug is so strong that it might be slightly more value to use Elemental Band right now than it is Endless Thirst. But don't be mistaken, like that's a very, very good artifact to have in your arsenal. I think this artifact is generally better than Ankh in the current situation of the game, and it's also a lot easier to acquire than Ankh, which is cool. Musket is trash? No, Musket's not trash. Musket's very good on the island. I used a Blooddrinker with spear builds, and it's kind of insane. Plus Cyclone, all this stuff on top. Ultra tanky. You need a new category called Gladiator. It deserves its own category. Yeah, when we get there. A Finisher is a very, very solid artifact. I think this is more value than Deep Freeze. I think this is more value than Leather Shoes. I think this belongs at the bottom of S. What Finisher does very, very well is and as a main hand in PvE, this is a top tier weapon to run all the time. It has top tier single target DPS. In terms of PvP, as an offhand, it just offers the utility that you get with Rapier along with extra utility where if the target has a bleed applied to them, you just deal 15% more damage with your main hand. This makes it so that it's very, very solid to use. It's also basically a must-have for next patch for the majority of players that are going to run a Rapier, because there is no Rapier in the game that is not deck space, I believe, from what we were looking at yesterday. That's like not a complete RNG drop. So this might be the best rapier that you have at 725 gear score. All those combined definitely making an S tier artifact is very, very solid to have. Honestly, it's probably higher than Boltcaster, but I still don't think it's quite as high as Elemental Band or Endless Thirst, but it's very, very good. Full boosting serum is so stupidly fun. Yeah, it is a little silly. Finisher got buffed due to the new perk, I think. The bleed one, or like the dot one. Yeah, it did, like indirectly. Because you can extend the duration of dots, and you also do an increased damage with them as well. Maybe it's honestly above Endless Thirst. Like, it's very, very good. It's like one of the best artifacts in the game. Freedom is kind of like it's a fine artifact, but it's not insane. Like, it definitely is like a C tier level artifact. What freedom is, it has a bunch of freedom on it. It's kind of a boring one, to be honest. This is the epitome of like of us saying, AGS, why are you not more creative with your artifacts? But anyways, this has a freedom effect built into it, and then also has freedom on it. So basically with this one artifact, you don't have to run any freedom, and you can get out of any root combo in the game, which is kind of cool. The only weird part about this is this unending freedom effectively makes this other freedom get less value by like a weird mechanic, and there are some thresholds that you don't get over with just freedom alone. You often need to have the freedom artifact, be it if you're in medium, and then one other freedom effect on top of that to get above the infinite stun duration combos that barely exist in the game. It's like mostly a Warhammer thing. So this artifact's like mostly used for larger scale. You could use it for smaller scale if you're really annoyed by like cheese builds, like particularly in 3v3. Those are relatively popular, but it's not widely used. I'd say it's something that if you get it, it's fine, but you're not likely to get it because it drops from the PvP track. It's cool because it lets never not freedom players have more build variety. Worst way to type that, but you know, yeah. I had a stroke reading that, but I know what you mean. Like, if you don't typically run freedom, you could just run this and then you're usually okay. Which perk did he mention earlier that reduces the cooldown on pots? It wasn't a perk, it's an artifact. I could jump to that artifact and we can kind of work our way back. Survivor's Coat, I think, is a very underrated artifact this next patch, and I'd aggressively put it in S- tier, mostly for small-scale content. So Survivor's Coat is a combo artifact. You want to run this with Endless Thirst every single time. What this does, every time you get below 50%, you gain 50 stamina, which is like a decent amount of stamina. You lose all your debuffs, and your health pot comes back on cooldown. So it's basically like an extra life. Like, you could think of it as like an extra life as a chess piece, and it's really, really good in like, I'd say 1 to 5 man content. If you get to like the 10v10 scale, I think it starts falling off a little bit, but because so much of the content is going to be focused towards the early game, I think this is a very solid artifact to pick up and something to use. This drops from the repeatable soul trials, so it's actually pretty easy to acquire as well. This is probably the artifact I'll be running on my fresh character for my armor piece, and I'll be going for this, I'll be going for Endless Thirst, and then we'll just be comboing that and basically be borderline invincible. Okay, so now we got Freya's Francisca. It's been a while since I've seen this one. I think this artifact's just completely outclassed now. At one point, this artifact was like used for PvE builds, and it was a top tier PvE DPS artifact. And then a new hatchet came out, and then everyone just switched to that hatchet. So I think this is like a B minus to C tier artifact. I think I'd probably put it in the bottom of B minus. It's fine. Empowering Ren throw makes it a dead perk. It's unfortunate. Yeah, I mean, the problem with this is you can't get social distance on here, right? Which is like usually one in terms of what you want in terms of utility hatchet. So this is like basically just a PvE artifact, and it's not the top tier PvE artifacts anymore. A Sin tends to get a little bit more value than this in most circumstances because it also increases your damage. So like it's viable, but it's not super strong. Using Freya's for throwing builds is trolling. I mean, yeah, you want to use it as a normal DPS hatchet build, but you just run rending throw, and then it's like, it's okay. It's just not great. But because Hatchet's so good in PvE, like you have to like put it in like a decent spot. Like maybe top of C is like the lowest I'd go with this. But not lower than that. Featherweight is still S tier. This is the best light artifact in the game. What Featherweight does is it basically makes you a medium player in light. And that means that you could be a lot more tanky. And you just win a lot of duels because you're a lot more tanky and you have the light class's movement, which the light class dodge is like often the favorite dodge ability for players that want to use dodge for distance. If you want to use dodge as a way to avoid damage mid-fight, the medium tends to be a little bit better. But if you're trying to play the distance game, light is better, and in that case, Featherweight is often the artifact people will go to. PvP, this is endgame, this is what you want. PvE, it's not bad. It's mostly a PvP-oriented artifact. Expect to see this a lot on the island. Expect to see it a lot in 3v3, OPR, and in war. It's very solid. Gilli's Gravity Gauntlets came out. No one used them, and I don't think anyone will ever use them. These are whenever you take damage, you gain Empower, and you get a charge of that increases the damage of your next attack by 2%, max 10 charges. So it's a maximum of 20%, which for reference, you just have passively with Elemental Band, which is why that artifact is so strong, but it only applies to one hit. So the idea of this is you take damage and then you deal the damage back. In practicality, if you're not Zarya from Overwatch, it doesn't really have that effect, and it just feels underwhelming. If they change this from 2% to 3% or maybe even 4%, it might see some use at 4%. I don't think it would at 3%. It needs serious buffs. A Ghostly Touch, I think, is a new one. It's almost cool, but just mostly bad. Yeah. Ghostly Touch is a new one. When you hit an Empower foe, dispel 2 of their Empowers and give yourself 10 seconds of 10% Empower with a 4-second cooldown. I think this is like a pretty consistent effect of proc. Like it's not insanely bad, but it's pretty bad because this 4-second cooldown is on you, so you cannot just consistently strip everyone of Empowers. You can only strip like one target of Empowers. So this is like a really good 1v1 artifact. It's okay in 3v3. And then beyond that, I don't think it's super viable. 4-second cooldown makes it awful unless it's per target. Yeah, it's not per target. It's a 4-second overall. If this was 4 seconds per target, it would be A to S tier. But because the 4 seconds applied is the cooldown on the player itself, this is like a C tier artifact. Like it's okay. If you want to use this in 1v1s, it's probably fine. But I think there's other artifacts on here that just generally provide more value. Ghoul Gloves is a meme artifact. They still have not buffed it. The meme for the longest time is Ghoul Gloves is the epitome of how we know AGS just doesn't know what they're doing from a PvP perspective. This is considered to be either the worst or the second worst artifact in the game because its Ghoul's Touch has a 3-second cooldown and only transfers 1 debuff on a conditional that you hit a foe that is below half health. So it's like it basically never procs, and it isn't super impactful when it procs either. I don't think there's much more to be said about it. It needs, like, if they got rid of the below half health thing, it still would not be viable. If they got rid of below the half health and the 3-second cooldown, I think it would be okay, but it wouldn't be OP. Like, it would be like A tier. So that artifact would need like 2 huge buffs in order to be viable, and right now it's just not that. It belongs at the bottom of D. Again, if it was per target, it could be super slick. Yeah, if it was per target, it'd be a bit better too. I still think they would need to remove the below 50% health thing. Transfer Rune Glass effect, huge. Yeah, pretty much. Gladiator is the other artifact that contends for the worst artifact in the game. I think Ghoul Gloves is a little bit worse than Gladiator, but Gladiator's really, really bad. Gladiator gives you 2 shield perks. It gives you keenly empowered, which is nice. So the main utility from this is you can get 4 damage perks on you with your shield, but your shield slot. So effectively, you can get more damage on your main hand is like the theory behind this because you have more perks on your shield. So you could use your shield artifact. You could use your like your Bloodletter or something like that, and you could have both those artifacts run on like a tank slot, right? But in practicality, it's just not quite there. I don't think I've seen anyone use this artifact. Is this one that you get from PvP Tune? You can only obtain this artifact once. Like, where does this one even drop from? Oh, it's dropped by like a random. Yeah, oh yeah, it's dropped by the Ice Mammoth thing in the new zone. Yeah, I just wouldn't bother with this. Like, it'd be fun. Like, I don't know what you do to make this good. To be honest, like it just feels like no one wants to waste their armor artifact slot on the shield. But it looks cool and it has a cool name, I guess. Like it's a good. The best part about this artifact is literally the skin. Like you could use this as transmog, and it's like kind of a cool transmog, and like that's the. I don't think there's anything else really going for it. Grace is an artifact that is new that is coming out that seems like it's going to be really solid. What Grace does from a greatsword side is it allows you to gain a passive haste effect. This offensive speed haste effect, so whenever you enter an onslaught stance, you gain 6 seconds of 20% move speed. This will work on your offhand, even if you proc it. And if you keep your greatsword out and you use like Relentless Rush and you tag one enemy, you gain 40% haste. So this is like a really good way to either gap close or to kind of get across the battlefield. The problem is that you don't really want to be in onslaught stance when you're taking damage, because that 15% damage that you take, that is a multiplicative 15%, and it really makes it so that you could die quickly. That being said, I think Grace, if it's used properly, is a very, very solid artifact. I think this is like a top of B, a lower of S. I think I'm going to start it in top of B because I think there's a decent amount of people that will just get in an onslaught stance and then they'll just find a way to lose half their HP bar. Switch off of Grace so that you lose the onslaught stance passives and then just like wonder why you lost the fight. And a lot of it will just come down to stance juggling. And while Grace is good for that and does help gap close, I don't think it's like as good as the other options that you have. If no cooldown and can stack like 3 stacks, it's good. Thorny Reflection basically has the same effect as Gladiator, so dumb. Yeah, it does. Grey Wizard's hat. Grey Wizard's kind of weird, because I thought this would be good at one point, because they said that they were like going to rework how mana works, and they're saying that mana would be more important in future patches, and I feel like we just aren't at the point where mana is super important yet. So I think this will be like an artifact that like within 6 months, which is kind of a long time, will be decent at some point, but for now it's like not super great. The best part about this is that it has extra stats. Like normally this would be 38 stats, it's 45 here. If we look at the upgrade recipe, does it link to... Yeah, it links to 700, so I can't even see the 725 gear score version. 6 months skull. Yeah, like it's not there yet. It's a D tier artifact, but like it's like one that like could be good at some point. Inferno used to be really bad, and then they reverted it, or they buffed it and didn't say anything, and we just figured out that they buffed it recently. The thing that they've done to this is that you could add a gem slot here, and then you also have an extra perk, which is nice, and then you also have just a passive 15% damage. The major con with this artifact in the past is if you use this for the strength side, your dot still scaled with int, which made it so that it didn't really make sense to ever run this for the strength side. But the passive 15% damage that you get will make it viable to use this on the inside, so you probably could go Fire Staff with like Rapier, Fire Staff with Ice Gauntlet. It seems like it would be fine for that situation. I don't think it's an S tier artifact, but it's definitely like high A. Like it's very solid. I don't think it's as good as Wing Shoes. I don't think it's as good as Deep Freeze. I don't think it's as good as Ankh, but I think it's a little bit better than the Abyss. Like it's an okay artifact now. It used to be a D tier artifact, but now it's fine. Wizard Hat may be useful due to Ice Gauntlet and Fire Mage get less mana regen in the skill tree. Maybe. I did see that they like changed how the passive mana there worked. I still feel like people won't want to run Grey Wizard's Hat though. Like at that point, do you ever go more focused? I don't think you ever go more focused. I feel like you'd probably run a mana pot on bar before you ran Grey Wizard's Hat, and you probably run a regen pot before you ran Grey Wizard's Hat, because regen pots give you mana too, and that's something that people often overlook. Maybe on big scale PvP where you just spam AoEs from the back. Like maybe. Like I'll listen to that artifact to put it at the top of D, but I'm not really willing to move it into C tier yet. Mana pot cooldown so short. Yeah, that's the other thing. Like usually mana's not a problem with the New World. Now we have Ironheart. Ironheart is a really cool artifact that I thought people would use a lot and just ended up not really going into because there was no content and around the time that this artifact got introduced, so people just kept what the artifacts already had. I still think this artifact's fine. The idea is if you run medium, because you cannot run this in light, you can't run a heavy like where in light doesn't work. You can't run in heavy because the actual perk itself, but you gain 20% health. So this is like, the value of this is about the equivalent of like 5 or 6 perk slots, which inherently makes it like pretty good. The other problem with it is it drops from the PvP track, which makes it nearly impossible to acquire. But if you get it, it still is like a B tier artifact. Like it's very fine. It's viable. It's not as strong as some of the other options I think that people tend to go with, but like it's a fine artifact. Ironheart Shaking Heels builds are fun though. Yeah, they're very like it's a good artifact. I just want to put it like at a near like broken status or anything like that. I get to like 26.6k HP as a bruiser build on it. It's not that bad. Yeah, but at the same time, you can go Tumbler, and then you could deal more damage, and then you can get a Fortify, which I guess I could look at Tumbler right now, but Tumbler is still top of S tier. I think it's higher than Elemental Band, to be honest. Like, I think Tumbler is the best artifact in the game still. And I'm very shocked it hasn't been nerfed, because it's been the best artifact since it came out, and it's like the first artifact to ever come out. The idea with it is if you successfully dodge an attack, you gain 15% in power and 25% fortify for 5 seconds, and then you're also healed, but for a bit. It's mostly about the empower and the fortify. 25% fortify is about the equivalent of 5 perk slots. 15% empower is just good. Like it's like 2 to 3 perk slots in this day and age, but like it's just a very good perk. That combined with the shrinking heal thing too, just makes it like a very fine artifact to use. The worst part about Tumbler is it comes with physical aversion, which is a dead perk. Everything else about it is fantastic. I'd rather see other artifacts buffs. Also, physical aversion is trash. Yeah, that's the worst part about it. But it's still top of S tier. That's like it's hard to ignore. It's just if you have any weapon in the game that's running light or medium, and you're at any point like, what artifact should I use if I want to be tankier and I want to do more damage? Your answer is always comes down to Tumbler. Like if you're any sort of like mid-range player, Tumbler's just like generally the one that you go to, and there's because it's so strong, like nothing else really competes with it. It makes the artifact endgame a little bit boring in my opinion. AGS adding physical aversion at every artifact. Yeah. Koya has physical aversion too, right? Yeah, it has physical aversion too. Incoming range damage attacks deal 13% less damage to you. So I calculated the difference between Koya and Featherweight at one point, and if you look at, like, I provided this information to AGS and they didn't listen to me, but in order for Koya's artifact to ever, in any condition, be better than Featherweight, this value would need to be about 18%. Otherwise, Featherweight is strictly better, and that makes Koya literally not viable. There's no situation where this artifact is ever better than Featherweight, and I guess you could try to use this artifact in medium, and like that would be the only spot it would ever be viable, but like, why? Just don't touch the artifact, it's not worth your time. In my opinion, aversion needs to be one perk, both physical and LE. I think it could be a little strong, but I understand why you'd come with that idea. Tumbler was amazing and heavy too before the stam nerf. Yep. Next we got Lifetaker. Lifetaker is a really good offhand. It's not a good main hand. What Lifetaker does is it applies a rend effect. And then that will apply off of both weapons. Also applies a dot with that, and that just makes it a really good offhand for increasing your damage output. Particularly strong on musket, decent on blunderbuss, decent on bow if you're being really, really greedy. Not commonly seen on bow. It's mostly a musket and a blunderbuss offhand artifact. So it's a bit niche. It's still like a B tier artifact though. It makes some builds possible. Like I'd put it a little bit below Azoth, probably a little bit below Ironheart, maybe a little below Blooddrinker. Like it's a good artifact, but it's like not broken. Like it's balanced. I'm late, but I did see Grace's in B. Did we discuss that it cannot use damage percent perks? I didn't even talk about that. I just talked about the utility part of Grace, because if you're ever thinking about Greatsword in terms of damage, there's literally a better Greatsword artifact to go. The utility, like Grace's purpose, in my opinion, is about closing distance, and it's about haste, and there's nothing else that it really does. Lifetaker is the best weapon artifact period for offhand, yes. I mean, no, because finisher exists. But if you're talking about with the dot effect, yeah, it's very, very good. Like Lifetaker, finisher, and a blunderbuss, which I can jump to right now, called Pestilence, are all very, very good just because they're their utility. I'd put Pestilence a little bit higher than Lifetaker though, because as an offhand, you usually want some ability to escape, and VG doesn't provide that. Pestilence does have the ability to escape with Net Shot. It's not a great ability, but it's a better ability to escape. And I think that alone puts Pestilence up at an A tier, even if Blunderbuss isn't that good of a weapon. It's also the best damage artifact, or best damage thing that you can go with Blunderbuss currently in the game. So that also makes it pretty good. I think there's some like new Blunderbuss perks that they introduce. I still think Pestilence is going to be the best one to go around. Lifetaker is best for some niche builds like Throwing Hatchet or Windshield, but generally speaking, Finisher is more like all around. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like if you could pick one, like you generally want to pick Finisher. The other point here too is you could use Finisher for BIS stuff in PvE and in PvP. Like Lifetaker is like 2 to 3 builds in the game will use Lifetaker. Like 10 to 20 builds in the game will use Finisher. Is 3-tech Lifetaker stronger than Finisher against heavy and med? Yeah, so Lifetaker's really, really good against heavy and medium. Like that's the idea, is it applies a passive like rend. But it's also really greedy because you don't have a way to escape. So it's like good versus like tanky players, but other than that, it kind of falls off. Isn't Lifetaker 21% rend? Well, it's disintegrate, and then you could have up to 3 disintegrates, and I think each disintegrate's 10%, so no, it should be 30% rend. But 30% rend isn't what 30% rend used to be. Like you see 30% and you're like, oh my gosh, it's a really big damage increase, right? And like a 30% rend is probably like a 10% damage increase versus a heavy player. The general conversion is you have your rend, right? For heavy, the damage increase is about a half. For medium, it's about, I think it's 2/5, and then for light, it's about a third. So 30% rend versus a light's a 10% damage increase. So 30% rend versus a heavy player is a 15% damage increase. Like it's not bad. Like it's pretty good in that circumstance, but that would need to be three hits because there's a 1 second cooldown on it. So it's like not amazing, but it's solid. And as a main hand, there's just better options too. 30% just doesn't buy what it used to. Yeah, pretty much. That's what it comes down to. It used to be better than what it is today. Lost Stopwatch is a tank PvE artifact that has some cheese build capabilities. The idea here is it can increase the duration of stuns. So this is particularly good in like 3v3 because it's a spot where a lot of cheese stun builds exist. I don't think cheese stun builds will exist in any other mode because in 1v1s you need a gap close, and anything that goes for these cheese combos usually has a trouble gap closing because they'll use the Warhammer. And I think that only makes it viable for like really, really small and close quarters engagements, and that probably puts it down to C tier status. Like I think it's less utility than Ghostly Touch, but it's viable in like very, very niche situations. Honestly, the best part about this is from a tanking and PvE side, because it's like very viable for tanking and PvE. So maybe because of the PvE capabilities, I'll bump it up to like mid C, but I wouldn't be willing to put it into B. Can we just go ahead and put Mjolnir in C already, just purely for the memes? Did I even put Mjolnir in here? Do I need to add Mjolnir? No, I did. Okay, cool. Yeah, maybe we can go over Mjolnir real quick. It has the weird O, so I can't search it. Right? I'm just gonna do Spark. There we go. Uh, this just converts her damage to lightning. Honestly, okay with the elemental ban that came out recently, but other than that, not really viable. And you can't put in a gem in here, so that reduces your power with the elemental ban. So it's not even like worth going with this with the elemental ban build. There's also no lightning damage increase currently in the game. So it kind of makes it hard to use this artifact. So it's a D tier one. I think it's like upper D tier though. Mighty Gavel Go Burr, one day, not today. Mag Gauntlets is an artifact that single-handedly enables VG to be good. That being said, VG is only viable on large scale, so it's still a C-tier artifact. This artifact is only good on VG, or if you have some build that's based off of crits applying a debuff as a utility build. Other than that, it's not viable at all, so it is like a very niche artifact. The other really bad part about this artifact is you have to run Tempest to get it. People that were here when I had to run Tempest, because at one point I wanted to get this artifact, I ran Tempest 46 times, and that's a dungeon that takes about an hour to do with pugs. So I wasted like 2 days of my life to get this thing, and it wasn't worth it. Like, it's good, but it's not like people make it out like this is the best artifact in the game. It like single-handedly like transforms how this class plays, and people like sang its praises for a long time. It's good. It's not that good. It was not worth the pain to get that thing through Tempest. It was okay. It's not a must-have like people make it out to be. Like, I think you could even like run like Nimble Coat instead of this, which we could talk about now. But like Nimble Coat is like a tier artifact, like probably a little better than wing shoes in some circumstances, where Nimble Coat just gives you a lot of CDR, and that can be better for those builds too, because it could use more ice showers. And VG IG is mostly about how many ice showers can you put down. It's not about how many VG orbs can you throw out. So I think it's outclassed by a few other artifacts. It's good though. It's just like not insane. Nimble Coat honestly is an S tier one though, because healers have started using this over Featherweight if they think that they're not super threatened, so that they can use more abilities. Very, very good for Fire Staff. Good for a few other utility based builds that are like light based. So I'd put Nimble Coat in S tier right now, maybe above Survivor's Coat. Like Survivor's Coat I think is barely at the bottom, and this is mostly there because I think we're gonna be talking about the island. I think Survivor's Coat's gonna be really good for the island. But yeah, that maybe fresh start isn't a good idea. Yeah, it's a little silly there. Wait, where did you even get Nimble Coat? Oh no. Yeah, it's a great artifact. You'll probably never get this artifact if you're a new player. I feel like people that watch this and back are gonna be like, what is this guy meaning? He's a doomer when he says you can't get this artifact. It says it drops like in all these different spots. What this means is there's about like a 3% chance, I think it's something along those lines, of it to drop at any one of these levels. And that's just for a artifact to drop, not just this artifact. It effectively means that you just do not find this ever. And it's something that got introduced because AGS wanted to... We told AGS that there needed to be more... Like, it was too hard to get artifacts in the end game because it was just, like, less of a drop chance. So in order to fix that, they basically just made it so it was hard to get the artifact in the early game. So then they never fixed the problem. They just created more of a problem, and they never reverted their decision. So this is, like, something that is kind of bubbles up from that change a long time ago. So it'd be 110 stamp if both proc and double regen serum? Yeah, it would be 110. The mechanic, I've heard some people joke about this for the island. I think the mechanic's always is a meme artifact, but it's never like completely viable. It reduces your trap and sticky bomb cooldown, but the problem is it's literally better to build traps and sticky bombs with pure damage than it is with pure CC reduction. So I guess if you want to like cheese someone and just keep someone in place for a long period of time, it's okay at that. Other than that, not really viable. To me, this is a C tier artifact. I know some people will try to hype it up, and it's a really fun artifact to use on paper, but all the musket players don't really use mechanic. They'd rather just use the artifact slot on finisher for the offhand, or on what do you call it for the offhand? Lifetaker for the offhand to get a damage bonus, and then just build the musket for pure damage and not CC, like spamming cooldowns. Are armor weapon drops in the third part of the PvP unlock as well? Yeah, they're at the very, very end. I mean, it doesn't matter in the large scale of things, but it's so annoying. Michael is a great skin for shields, but it's not viable. At least I don't remember it being viable unless they changed something about it, but I don't think they did. I'm going to double check to see if they changed anything about Michael, because I want Michael to work, but I don't think Michael's ever going to work. What Michael used to do is it used to make it so that if you got tagged by a blunderbuss, it stripped every single debuff you had on you. And then they realized that was a bug, and they just put an internal cooldown on this refreshing cleanse, I believe. Or they made it so it only works on one buff. Yeah, so numb stats effect just one. So it only, like, every time you get hit, you lose one. So it's not quite there anymore. That effectively puts it like high D tier. No, it's not even high D tier. I'm kind of coping with that. It's a mid D tier artifact. Like probably better than Cowl of Power, probably better than Djinj. Okay, this is getting weird, but there we go. Michael skin S tier. I love the skin. I'm the one that uses it all the time. Nature's Wrath was good at one point. By was good, I mean this was hard meta for Fire Staff. So limits the duration of Empower to expire instantly, and durationless Empower potency is reduced by 50%. They always take 20% more base damage. They also converted all the Fire Staff stuff to be coded under Empower, so it will actually work versus those. Dealing the 20% more base damage is a really nice bonus, but now there's no way to cheese around the Empower loss, and that effectively makes it so it's not viable in terms of a damage artifact anymore. I think it's like, people will try to make use of this. I still think it's like, even with its current status, it's okay, but I don't think it's anything better than C tier. Yeah, maybe C. Yeah. Was A tier for niche, now is B, maybe C. Yeah, I think it's just the problem is that 20% base damage that you gain is going to end up losing you more damage because you don't have the empowers, and you want to stack all those like empower and base damage effects to maximize your damage. Odo is completely outclassed now. There's no reason to go Odo, but it's okay from a tanking standpoint, I guess. Like if you're solo and you're just 1v1ing people, so I'll put it at the bottom of C just because like in a 1v1 situation, it can be okay. What Odo does is every time you block an attack, you gain health. Like that's it. Block an attack, gain health. The 20% more damage to stun or knock down foes is kind of bugged because the knockdown status effect is not super consistent within the game. Like there's a difference between knockdown and standing back up. Like you don't have the knockdown status effect, so that effectively doesn't work with that. It does work with stuns, like the 20% more damage, but there's just better ways to get a damage increase than this. Phoenix went from broken because you can live forever to not viable at all to like okay. I think it's good for certain builds, but it's like kind of in a niche spot. The idea with this is if you die, you gain extra life, but you start losing your health kind of rapidly, and you need to trade out or else you will die. So it's like you rebirth, but you have you have to get a kill, or you just will die in a few seconds. So I think it's like good for the island because you're able to get that second life and like maybe trade out and keep your stuff. So I would probably put it in B tier. Like upper B tier, but I don't think I'm quite willing to put this artifact in S tier yet until I see a little bit more from it. Or in A tier yet until I see a little bit more from it. I think it's going to be okay. Power Stone. This is the one that I kind of wanted to talk about today. Power Stone, I'm going to be controversial, I think, with this. Like, some people consider this controversial. I think this artifact single-handedly brings Flail back from being a completely useless class to being somewhat viable. The idea from this is if you are above 90% health, then your attacks cause 20% weaken for 5 seconds. This is a 5% cooldown on each target, so it will work off of AoEs. And you're pretty consistently above 90% health in medium to large scale PvP. I think this single-handedly enables Flail to be viable and makes the class from like a D tier class in general to like high B, low A. And that's literally just off of this artifact alone. I don't think I could put it anything higher than A tier because the game's mostly focused towards small scale now, but it is like a very, very powerful artifact alone. War S, OPRB, 3v3C, unless you have pocket, then all modes to S. Yeah, I mean, it's just a really good artifact. I mean, anytime you're running a flail, you should be using Power Stone now. It is that good. I think it also will enable flail from going from like 1 slot in a 50-man army per war to about 3 to 4. I think people will start using a VG flail again because I think it has good synergy with VG. Because your VG AoEs will proc this weekend, and that's just like really high value. So now we have Quickdraw Gloves. This is an iframe that applies if you switch weapons. In practice, it's really inconsistent. It was also only obtainable at the time by like level 100. I think that it drops now, yeah. It's not a very easily acquired artifact, but and it's not really used. Like, I think this is like a high D tier artifact, but it's still D tier. Why do I have 2 Quickdraw Gloves? Like, I think this keeps bugging. Oh well. Serenity is a mid S tier artifact. Like, it's a little bit worse than Boltcaster, I'd argue. Probably a little bit better than Nimble Coat because it really, really enables that class. The problem that you'll realize with Serenity is if you don't have it now, it's really, really hard to get. But this comes with 2 perks that are very, very solid for Greatsword. The Trenchant Strikes is really, really good versus people, like, just because you want to be using heavy attacks and Greatsword of doing high burst damage. This is Abyss artifact for both PvE and for PvP. The only thing that I think hurts this artifact is a bit is if people use target lock, you literally have no opportunity to hit people from behind. That being said, for the most part with this artifact, it was more of a thing that you used when people were not focusing on you. You hit them with a heavy attack, and then you go into, what do you call it with Greatsword? You go heavy attack into, where's my Greatsword? You go into this ability, Steadfast Strike, and it would literally just one-tap healers. And I think it still will one-tap healers. You just got more damage at this next patch. Very good. If you're the GOAT, it's S, but most people with any latency just make it D. I still think it's... I can't not put it in S because it's so good in PvE too is the thing. Like, this is top tier PvE, it's top tier PvP. It's a little bit harder to use, but it's definitely worth getting good at. Serenity won't drop for my second tune, 50 plus tracks after 200 without a Greatsword. Yeah, like any of the PvP artifacts are just like not really obtainable now for new players, but for legacy players, they're fantastic if you have them. If you're a new player, and you realize that you're not getting the PvP stuff for stuff I'm mentioning in like 2 weeks, please yell at AGS because they wouldn't listen to us, but maybe they'll listen to you. Because it is really, really hard to get the PvP artifacts now. Sin is a really, really good utility-based hatchet offhand. Also very good for PvE. Very, very viable. Definitely high A, low S. I'd probably put it high A right now for where it's at. I think it's a little bit worse than Deep Freeze and large scale, but I think everything is a little bit more focused towards small scale right now. I think Winged Leather's a little bit better, but it definitely belongs in this A tier. It's very viable. Very, very good. Scorpion Sting is the most fun artifact in the game, objectively. No one will say otherwise. That being said, it's not the hardest artifact to get in the game. I guess the PvP ones are harder to get than this. It's just like kind of painful because you have 1 chance per day-night cycle and Brimstone for this to drop. Pretty good in small scale up to large scale in PvP. Not really viable in PvE. So that probably puts it in line of like low A tier, high B tier in terms of artifacts. I think I'm comfortable putting it high B, a little bit more than low A. I think Pestilence and the Abyss are like a little bit better than it, but I think it is like a very, very good artifact to get. It's a very fun one too. Like definitely one I recommend picking up. It's just like you don't need the Scorpion Sting to like completely succeed with Spear. In fact, like I think like a quarter to a third of spears currently use Scorpion Sting, and most people would rather just use a normal spear because you can get net more damage. But it's a very fun artifact to use. What it does is if you hit people with a javelin effects, it pulls people towards you, and it's like so satisfying to hit unranged players. Honestly, might be pretty good on the PvE island, because if you hit a musket player, they're just kind of cooked. I guess just because of that, I'll throw it in A, because I think it's a good counter to the musket. Like, I'll put it bottom A, and like barely put it above, because I think this is mostly focused towards the island. Thank God they nerfed powder burn slow. Musket with Sin and FFA would be extra cancer with the 8-second, 45% slow. Yep. Sin extends the duration of your debuff, so it's like really, really toxic with a lot of the debuff-centric builds. Scorpion A for the rat hunting potential and fun. Yeah, like I don't want to put it like mid A, but I'll definitely put it in the bottom end of A. Freudian slip called it PvE Island. Unfortunate. Tempest Fury is the Whirlwind Great Axe. It's kind of fun. So you use Whirlwind, you spin around, you gain a bunch of speed. I think this artifact's actually pretty good in this next patch because it's a way to consistently get grit on Great Axe. I think it's actually pretty underrated for next patch. That being said, I'm not willing to put this anywhere above like high B tier for now. Like I think it's around where Grace and Butcher are. Like it's fine. And it's like last patch I would put it in C tier, but with the grit changes I put it a little bit higher. Whirlwind's not really that good of a perk, but it does give you grit, and Grit Axe players are going to be crying this entire next patch about why they don't have grit on every single attack, because they just got rid of that with the 300 con change. Alright, we got the wall. You need this to tank in PvP. Oddly, a really good PvE artifact as well. For anything that has a mutation, the wall just reduces a ton of damage. Most people, you don't see it a lot in like high level lobbies because people are speedrunning, but in terms of casual play with tank, this is a very, very good artifact. I think this is a little bit more mandatory than Butcher for tank. That being said, it is like you need to run it like with Butcher around the Butcher level. I think it's a little bit better than Grace. I don't think it's quite as good as Phoenix, but it's like in there in that like higher B tier. What the wall does too is it makes it so that you can't dodge, but you take a lot of reduced damage effects, or a lot of reduced damage from elemental sources. This was bugged originally, it didn't even work. It took about 3 months for AGS to fix that. Once it was fixed, it became pretty good. The worst part about it is it comes with Keenly Fortified on it, which is like such a dead perk, it's not even funny. And you can't get Sturdy Fortification because you have Keenly Fortified on it. So that's the biggest downside with it, but the fact that you gain 33% more stamina just makes it pretty solid to get, to be honest. Trsna is a new Warhammer that is a really cool skin, and everyone just wants it for the skin because it has this glowing eye, but it's only viable in solo PvE. 25% lifesteal versus knockdown foes. That is not a common conditional to get. Knockdown status effect, as I talked about earlier, is like very, very inconsistent in this game because the knockdown part is only when people are like falling to the ground. When they start getting back up, it's no longer the knockdown status. Makes it very hard to trigger off of that. Lifesteal, Trenchant Recovery is like basically just asking for you to be a solo like player with it. I cannot put this anywhere above D. I think it's worse than Mjolnir. Cool skin though, but it is really, really bad. Honestly, it's like towards the bottom of D. Like it's one of the worst artifacts in the game. Like I think it's a little bit better than Gilli. I don't think it's better than Djinj. All right, we got Unmoved. Unmoved. Did you test the wall? Oh, I read that earlier. Yeah, the wall works now. Unless they changed something like very, very recently, but it should work now. The Unmoved is interesting, and I think it's something that could be like this weirdly could be used in a raid if there's some sort of knockback mechanic in one of the sections. Like it's good because it gets rid of knockbacks and all these effects that move you, but it's kind of niche. It comes with a physical aversion, which is also basically a dead perk in every mode. Grit Ward is also not very good. Never really got used, dropped from the PvP track. I want to say it's better, but it belongs in D tier, unfortunately. Unyielding is basically just damage reduction in PvP. This got changed so that you could use it with light equip load because of the armor changes, and that made it so it was competitive, but still not as good as Featherweight in circumstances where headshots were dealt to you. If I remember correctly, like it was like they're pretty close when headshots were dealt to you, but that was like the only time it was ever viable. Still not viable. Um, I'll put it like I don't think there's ever a spot where you'd use this instead of Featherweight's the problem. So it's like really hard to even put it in C tier, but like I'll put it at the very bottom of C tier because it is not like the worst artifact in the game, but like, Featherweight is just better for light. For medium, it doesn't work super great with a lot of the armor loads with the change to how the damage reduction works. Like it's okay. May be useful for tank and New World Eternum because less grit. Yeah, I mean it could be like I feel like it's okay, but like I still don't think I'd ever use it like as a tank. Like I think as a tank, like if you have anything with a sword and shield, you probably want the wall. If you don't have a sword and shield, you probably want Void Darkplate, which is also like a tier artifact. Void Darkplate just gives you extra armor. Like it's just like yeah, I'd just rather run Void Darkplate. Like it's a little bit worse than Ankh, a little bit worse than Inferno, a little bit worse than Power Stone, a little bit worse than the Abyss. Better than Pestilence. It's like it's up there. The advantage of Void Darkplate is that you can run Void Darkplate, and then you can run a lot of shirking fortification effects and like other ways to get fortify, and then that will just make it so that your armor is really, really good. I think the other thing with Void Darkplate that people sleep on is that you could use this in combination with the new Sword and Shield perk in Heavy that will make it so that your fortify effects are extended by 5% per hit that comes to you. So if you got hit by a Thunderblast, that would extend all fortify effects and every other buff by 30%. I think this actually could be like breaking the meta for Heavy next patch. Yeah, just too many good things to compete for the armor artifact. That's what I'm saying about Unyielding. It's like all the art. There's a lot of really good armor artifacts. It's very hard to be considered like a good armor artifact. That's the main reason why there's so many in D tier. Vengeance is also like a bottom D tier artifact. This is a life staff that boosts your damage. There's some cheese builds that use Vengeance, but in general, what Vengeance is known for is it's an artifact. So if you're a new player to the game, you might want to listen to this. Vengeance is the artifact that if you see any player use in terms of a pug content, you immediately get kicked. Like, it's without question, you basically just get insta-kicked. And that's because it literally just makes your healing worse, and the damage isn't meaningful because you're a life staff player. So, like, please just don't touch this artifact if you want to, like, avoid, like, players that have played the game being toxic. It is an artifact that you can get kind of early on, too, which is why so many people used it, but, like, it's not viable. Like you could, some speedrunners I think have tried to use it for PvE, and then even in that circumstance, it didn't seem like it was doing that well. Also, where did it even end up? I put it in D, right? Yeah, I put it in D. It's better than Koya, it's better than Creed. It's really bad though. Venom. Venom is only good for one reason right now, and it's because of a bug. Venom combined with Elemental Band is pretty solid. Basically, this applies an extra dot. Extra dots give you extra empower. Extra empower is the main thing that you want on Spear. So with that concept existing, this is a B tier artifact. Once that gets fixed, this artifact goes back down to D tier. It's going to be very, very... it's going to fly like off of that B tier really, really quickly. The only reason why I'm going to put it this high is because it has access to a good amount of dot effects. Those dot effects will proc Elemental Band. That will give you empower. And the main thing Spear has going for it is it has really, really high base damage. It has low empower. This solves all the problems that you'll have. But doing heavy attacks with Spear is not super consistent, so you kind of have to juggle that there. Creed Boots and Quickdraw Gloves we've already rated, so I think this is all the artifacts now. Even for PvE, they prefer Lifetaker for the Rend. Yeah. That's funny. Coup de Grace counts as a heavy. Yeah, I mean, that's the main thing. So, like, that's something to point out, too. I didn't point that out because, like, most, like, older-ish players know this, but newer players, if you get down to Coup de Grace, this attack counts as a heavy. I believe Javelin also count. No, it doesn't count as a heavy. It feels like it should count as a heavy, though. But Coup de Grace does count as a heavy, and it will proc a lot of the Spear effects. AGS should change Vengeance to gives team 1% damage per stack. If they did that, it would be viable, but that's like the only way. Or like people within your party. So this is what I have for artifact tier list for like stuff that's coming out in the near future in terms of what content people will be doing. I think this is, honestly, I'm pretty happy with this list. This is more towards like small to medium scale content. But I think it's pretty accurate, to be honest. The only ones that like I think might be flexible, Azoth Conductors could jump up a lot if people start playing medium, because 15% elemental damage is like very, very good. But I don't expect a lot of elemental players to like want to go medium. So I think we got through that pretty fast. I thought that would take like an hour and a half to 2 hours, and I think we got through that in like an hour and 15.